So you now have an intermediate level physique. Congratulations to you, you've made it. You've done something that most will never be able to achieve, and that's escape the sticky and under muscle clutches of the beginner level physique. And unfortunately, this is where most lifters will reside, not just for years or decades, but for entire lifetimes. And the gym experience for them will be predominantly one that brings dissatisfaction and confusion. Now, as an intermediate lifter, this isn't something you have to worry about. You're going to be faced with a whole other set of problems that you're going to need to overcome. What do you do from here? What happens next? What are some of the psychological issues that you're going to experience during this often lengthy phase? These are some of the topics I'm going to be discussing in today's video. Firstly, if you are a beginner lifter, or more specifically someone that's been training for some time and is still stuck with a beginner level physique, I strongly recommend you check out my previous video, where not only do I define what a beginner level physique looks like, but also outline the most important thing that you need to be focusing on to navigate through this phase into the intermediate stage. Also, you can check out my online coaching services, where via the combination of a well-designed and personalised program, along with consistent and high-quality communication, we can quickly transcend the hellhole that is sometimes the beginner level physique stage. Now, as a lifter with an intermediate level physique, you have well and truly earned your stripes. You've put the grind in, and you can wear that badge of pride. Ultimately, you've done something that most people will fail at. You would have developed your behavioural traits, improved your character, and ultimately become a better man, in my opinion, through this journey. You're a better man now with an intermediate level physique than you were with a beginner level physique, because you've learned patience, you've learned to be consistent, delayed gratification, a good work ethic. Assuming you've got average genetics, this is something that isn't easy to do, and you would have had to have worked quite hard for quite some time to get to these stages. It's as simple as that. And your physique reflects that. It's obvious that you lift weights. You're a guy that goes to the gym. People can see that very clearly. And I will say that body fat percentage has a lot to do with how people perceive you, especially as a natural. You're going to look, very unimpressive with large amounts of body fat. That's just how it is. And you're going to look a lot more impressive, and people are going to perceive you as a lot more muscular with lower levels of body fat. But body fat percentage aside, you've developed some muscle, and let's say you've got a physique that most men would very much like to have if they could. I think that's a fair enough way of putting it. So with the beginner stage, you can really just kind of bludgeon your way through, as I said in the last video, through very hard training, assuming you're getting close to or to failure pretty much every set you do with well executed movements. You are definitely going to surpass the beginner level of physique and move into the intermediate stages 100%, irrespective of all other variables. Now, the same is not to be said with the intermediate stage. It's a lot harder. You now have the daunting prospect, you are faced with the daunting prospect of having to work harder for less progress than when you're in your beginner stages. And that is very daunting indeed. You can't bludgeon your way through. You're going to have to think a little bit more about this. You're going to have to get better at problem solving and developing plans. You're going to have to take care of all of the other variables that go into this, because the law of diminishing returns is all powerful, and it will put a stop to your progress if you're not careful. It's all too easy for that to happen. So when you're in your intermediate stage, I think one of three things tend to happen. Number one is that you willingly stay with an intermediate level physique. You are content with how you look, you put the work in, and you've got enough muscle mass. You're kind of happy with where you're at, and you just kind of maintain. You're not actively seeking to gain any more muscle mass. You don't really want to kind of put the work in to get to that next stage. The work that you'd need to do to get there would be too much. You're simply not interested in it. Stage two would be unwillingly staying in the intermediate phase, and this is where most people are going to fall into. If you think getting out of beginner phase is difficult, wait till you get to an intermediate level, because it's a hell of a lot harder, and that stage can be even longer. And now number three would be that you manage to overcome the intermediate phase and you move up into the holy grail of lifting the advanced level of physique. And that is no easy feat. So one of three things tends to happen. And again, like I said, most people probably going to fall into route two there. So in this video, I'm not going to discuss how to move up into the advanced stages. That's going to be a different video, and that'll be coming quite soon, so keep your eyes open for that. But what I am going to discuss is the psychological kind of stuff that you're going to go through as an intermediate lifter. And some of the experiences that you might go through, and hopefully some of you can relate to what I'm saying, and I might offer some, you might find some solace rather in what I've been through personally and kind of what I'm conveying to you, because it can, I guess, kind of be a lonely place. So yeah, that's what I'm going to kind of discuss. Now, the first point I really want to make is that your workouts are now really going to be dependent upon your discipline and not motivation. When you're a beginner, you're ultimately highly motivated, because if you get it right, you're going to see really good returns really quickly, and that is going to create a very obvious and positive feedback loop where the work that you're doing creates results, therefore you want to do more to see more results. And quickly that will help you to get through that beginner stage. Unfortunately, the same can't be said once you're in the intermediate stage. Forget about doing it wrong. Even when you do it right, it's not obvious that you're making progress. Let's say within a 3-month training block, you're not really sure whether you've seen any decent kind of muscle growth, especially if you've got more body fat. I guess it becomes more of a leap of faith, really. You need to believe that what you're doing is going to enable you to see results long term. But you don't have that kind of short-term motivation anymore, where you can really see quite obviously the returns of the hard work that you're doing. And that's why I guess progressive overload works quite well. Simple kind of strength tracking, because it's quantifiable and enables you to kind of judge the effectiveness of your training and what it could possibly lead to in terms of physique development later on down the line. That's certainly one positive of it. But yeah, ultimately it's about discipline now. Plus the fact that you've been training for quite some time. It's a monotonous journey, and it's a lonely journey more often than not. And things start to get quite hard. Sometimes doing your sessions, the prospect of knowing that you have to continually work really, really hard all of the time, it's mentally kind of overwhelming at times, I would say. It really isn't, it's not something that's there with your beginner phases, because you're seeing that kind of, that increase in muscle mass more quickly. But yeah, a lot of sessions when you're in the intermediate phase will be completely and solely reliant upon your discipline level, as opposed to your short-term motivation. And it's a hard graft, it really is. To go in week out and week in week out and put a very, very high level of effort in if you're actively trying to improve your physique, because it doesn't get easier, it gets harder. It gets harder and harder and harder, and the harder you train, the more mentally exhausting it is. Whether you're doing high reps or low reps, it's all the same really. If you're doing high reps, you're going to have to push through large amounts of pain. If you do very low rep training, it's psychologically really kind of exhausting. And you develop a lot of anxiety going into those sets, knowing kind of, I guess, the fear of failure. The fear of failure is quite strong as well on those big compound lifts. And again, that's a trap that you can fall into with SBD especially. Like I would get so anxious going into a squat workout. I would think about it and dread it constantly. I would dread it. The feelings going into that session would be mostly unpleasant. And only through my discipline and strong work ethic and perseverance was I able to actually get through those phases. It certainly wasn't enjoyable. After the workout comes the enjoyment, for a short period of time, but then it goes back to thinking about the next workout. So, things definitely do get harder physically and psychologically. I wanted to touch a little bit more on progressive overload and why it can sometimes be a damaging system to follow when you're in the intermediate stages of your physique development, because ultimately within that period of time we haven't yet developed that kind of open-mindedness and high level patience that comes, I think, with being more of an advanced lifter. So we're kind of stubborn and we have a lot of tunnel vision on a certain concept that maybe worked for us during our beginner phases, and we're really dogged on kind of making that continue to work, and that's when we can run into problems. And I think that's especially true with progressive overload, more so on the big lifts in particular. That's a real trap that we can fall into. So one thing that we start to notice is how body weight correlates to the strength in the gym, to the weight on the bar. And ultimately, when we go into the gym, when you have created this kind of plan and your sole focus is to improve performance on these lifts, you are going to do whatever it takes to be able to increase your performance. And that means gaining weight. And whilst that works and it is very, very effective, where do you draw the line? And it's very easy to get carried away with that, because you're consistently seeing with more body weight comes more strength, like clockwork, each and every week, without failure. I would have never have got my squat and deadlift to the weights that I was lifting without gaining a lot of body weight. I'm just not built for it. I don't have the genetic disposition to really be that strong. Unfortunately, it's just not my body type. But while gaining that kind of weight, I was able to lift those weights. And, I do think, as I said, there's some benefit to that, but it can become a very unhealthy relationship. Ultimately, I started my physique journey to build a better physique. And the very thing that I'm trying to do to increase my strength is ultimately destroying the look of my physique. So it's this funny kind of concept that you just get stuck on whilst in the intermediate kind of stage. Moreover, we haven't really developed that kind of really high level patience and understanding that we can't get stronger each and every week. We're trying to replicate what we were doing in the beginner phases, and it's just not going to happen. So we're, when following a very rigid progressive overload approach, judging the effectiveness of a workout on your performance in the gym, on the numbers. And if they don't go up, whether it be more reps or more weight on the bar, then we perceive that workout to be a failure. It's ineffective. It has to go up on paper for me to deem that session to be, a good quality workout and productive. You haven't got that kind of patience or knowledge yet to understand that you might be gaining strength, but you just aren't able to express that each every session because there are so many other variables that can influence that. And you become just so kind of focused, at the expense of everything else on getting the weight up on the bar. And it becomes this really kind of negative, mindset and relationship. And, I used to, as I said before at the start of the video, get myself into such a frenzy before, say, squats or deadlift. I would be really anxious, and the fear of failure would almost prevent me from doing the session itself. I always did. So I will say that it improved my mental strength by doing stuff that ultimately I didn't enjoy doing week in, week out, without fail. But it wasn't a pleasant experience for sure, going in and doing those workouts. But does it have to be? Not everything should be fun and everything should be pleasant, for sure. But I think it definitely was a damaging mindset, being so rigid and so focused on that kind of concept, that it really does affect us, mentally in quite a negative way. So yeah, there are important points to consider, and something that maybe you can move away from, or be a little bit open-minded about when you're in the intermediate level of physique development. So the next point I'm going to talk about is injuries. Now, as your training becomes better, as your execution becomes better, as you spend more hours with the weight in your hand, the tools of your kind of labour in your hand, you become more effective and more efficient at performing those movements. Ultimately, things do become safer, but then again, you are stronger now, so the risk is quite high. You are able to train harder. Your intensity is consistently much higher now as well, once you're an intermediate. So it kind of balances it out. I guess the risk is probably the same. But what you do tend to find, now, as I went from beginner phase to intermediate, my training improved massively, because I didn't have access when I first started really to YouTube or anything like that. I would train like a complete idiot. I got through the beginner physique development phase solely through very, very hard training. Pure intensity in the gym, just train like a madman. But I had no idea what I was doing. My form was probably, abhorrent. The splits that I was doing was just, completely, weird and wacky. But yeah, I made it. And that's why I push training all the time to you guys. But yeah, I got a load of injuries, kind of messed my shoulders up and all this and that. But when I got into the intermediate stages, my training got a lot better, and I got a lot less acute injuries, where I was training in the gym and I suddenly felt something go. That wouldn't really happen anymore. But what would happen would be the overuse injuries. Now, you've been training for some time now. You've been training intensely for some time with good loads. and things start to get a little bit tired, a little bit cranky. Things like tennis elbow and golfer's elbow, tendonitis in the knees, maybe hip kind of lumbar pain. Things just start kind of cropping up that aren't going to stop you from training per se, but just feel uncomfortable. It's annoying to have to work around or try to figure out how to solve. I call them floating pains because they just kind of randomly appear from one joint to the next. Usually, again, with knowledge, it's certainly easier to fix, but some can be very stubborn. You might have to work for a period of 3 or 4, 5, 6 months with inner elbow pain before finally it just sort of suddenly alleviates. It tests your discipline. You're going to have to be really disciplined to make it through the intermediate level of physique development stage. You really will be, because that motivation kind of dissipates. Things become uncomfortable. More so than when you're a beginner. You don't really have those kind of same aches and pains. Everything feels fresh. It doesn't anymore. So you kind of have to push yourself to go in and do something that you may not really kind of want to do, or is certainly ruining your enjoyment at the time. And I think, as an intermediate lifter, you're still kind of fixated sometimes upon a certain routine or a certain style of lifting, really kind of attached to certain movements and a way of training or a certain rep range. And it's hard to kind of, approach that more freely and kind of unhook yourself from that mentality. It's not until you become advanced that I think that's more easy to do. So yeah, you might have to kind of work through, pain basically. And yeah, that's kind of a frustrating experience. Now, the last point that I'd like to talk about is perhaps going to be the most relatable and most useful for those of you that are currently grinding through that intermediate level of physique development. And it'd be a warning to heed for those of you that aren't quite there yet, something to bear in mind. And it's to do with psychology and the perception of your physique, because it all changes when you move from beginner to intermediate. Everything changes. Now, as a beginner, generally speaking, you're going to see good progress quite quickly. If you're training hard, you're executing your movements well. This gives you a lot of confidence. Within a 3 to 6 month period, you can see some really good gains, and it makes you feel really good. Especially if you're, maybe young and you're, still, hanging around or with guys that maybe aren't quite fully grown yet. They're late developers perhaps, and if you're training hard, you're going to push forwards in terms of, physical kind of prowess really quickly. It's going to make you feel good, have this kind of false sense of confidence about you. And I think you're blissfully unaware of how good your physique is or isn't at that time as a beginner. And you think generally that the rate of progress you've seen is going to be continual, for years to come. You can't imagine it ever slowing down. You see this in social media posts where a guy might post his physique 20 years old and you get a commenter saying, oh, what's it going to look like at 32? Was an actual lifter, probably, slightly better. That's the reality of it. And that's what you start to understand as an intermediate lifter. It's not easy. This journey is not easy. You're really going to have to work hard at this. And the further along you go, the harder you have to work. The more difficult it becomes to add that extra 500 grams of muscle. And that can leave you feeling a little bit demotivated, a little bit depressed even. You start to compare yourself to others a little bit more as an intermediate. You start to have a bit more self-doubt. Is my physique as good as I once thought it was? Those guys that maybe weren't taking their training seriously are starting to maybe pull ahead because they're seeing very quick progress once they start training properly. If they've got good genetics, they're really starting to make progress, and suddenly you start seeing physiques, and you're aware of that are light years ahead in terms of physique development, and you know that you can't get there anytime soon. You know that it's not going to happen overnight, and as a beginner you kind of don't realise that. I think that a lot of lifters with an intermediate level of physique, and even beginners, go through this period where you might kind of fall out of love with the process. You're uncertain of yourself, a little bit down in the dumps about it. You feel like you're not making any progress, but everyone around you is, because you're comparing yourself to others constantly. I mean, social media has made that even worse. Really, the biggest accounts are those with the best genetics. Most of these are going to be taking steroids as well, and some are going to be lying about it. So, you're always comparing yourself to like the best of the best, and it creates a scenario where you're just not really enjoying it that much. And I think it's the first period of time where you are kind of aware of your genetic capability as well. You don't tend to think about that as a beginner. Now, you're not, at peace with it. You're not kind of acceptant of it yet. That comes, I think, when you're more advanced. But you are aware of it, and you start to realise that maybe other people have it a little bit easier than you. And it's not really that fair. This game isn't fair. It's as simple as that, guys. We don't have the same kind of playing cards initially. So this can put you in quite a negative kind of mindset, for quite some period of time. I think there are going to be a lot of unenjoyable periods, predominantly during the intermediate stages of physique development. I would say that it's the stage you're going to enjoy the least, but it's the most rewarding to emerge from and finally get that advanced level of physique. It's incredibly rewarding. Now, all of the stages are difficult to kind of push through, but I think the intermediate one in particular is more so mentally challenging to surpass. A beginner might have these same kind of self-doubts and down feelings at times, but the difference is that when a beginner gets it right, they see really good progress, and that quickly boosts their confidence. They enjoy it a lot more. They get that pleasure from that feedback. But an intermediate doesn't get that. They continue to have to grind constantly, irrespective of whether they're enjoying it or not, to see the results. And they're not sure whether the work they're doing at the moment is going to provide really decent results. So that's why it's so difficult. And you haven't yet developed that kind of mindset that maybe an advanced level lifter has. So I think that's pretty much it for the video. If you enjoyed it, then please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to see more of my content, and don't forget to check out my description box for all the links to online coaching, my Excel tools, free Google Sheets, free newsletter, all that kind of stuff. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching once more, and stay strong.